rumbling sound of the alarm clock didn't wake Mary up. By that time she was already lying with her eyes wide open, long accustomed to waking up at this time without any alarm. She wound it up every evening out of habit, doing it automatically, just like everything else. The woman swung her legs off the bed and threw on her robe. Walking into the kitchen, she put the kettle on the stove. While it boiled, she went to the bathroom. Everything as usual. A typical morning, indistinguishable from any other. After her bath, she made herself instant coffee with milk. The only thing that could add some variety to her morning was breakfast. After pondering for a few seconds whether to fry eggs or make sandwiches, Mary settled on butter and cheese sandwiches. She had her breakfast, returned to the bedroom and glanced at the unmade bed. Sometimes she really wanted to say screw it and leave the bed as it was. After all, who would see it besides her? The last time someone peeked into her apartment was her neighbor from the first floor, asking for baking soda. And that was about a month and a half ago. Mary sighed and neatly made the bed. She smoothed out a wrinkle with her palm. Habit, second nature, and perhaps tidiness was in Mary's blood after all. Now she would head to work, leaving the apartment in perfect order. The cup and plate were washed in the kitchen after breakfast. Nothing was out of place anywhere. Mary had accustomed herself to this long ago, once hoping that an unexpected and exciting male guest would enter her apartment. What he would be like, Mary didn't know, but she often dreamed about it. In short, once upon a time. But now she had stopped dreaming, yet she still kept the apartment tidy. Before leaving, Mary glanced briefly at herself in the mirror hanging in the hallway. Nothing striking caught her eye, just an ordinary gray mouse. Her hair was neatly tied back in a bun, dark-colored clothing. Mary believed that at 35 there was no need to dress brightly. Only young people could look flashy, and she too once wore an orange puffer jacket and an emerald sweater. It didn't help. No one ever asked Mary to marry them. At 25, there were some frivolous relationships with not very attractive young men. Mary wasn't in love with him, but she was ready to marry. However, the guy himself wasn't interested. After hanging around Mary for 2 years, he met a more attractive girl. Mary remembered their last conversation very well. "Mary, please forgive me. You're a very good and kind person, homely, calm. Someday you'll be the perfect wife. But just not for me. I've thought a lot and realized that love and passion are more important than tranquility. I need someone else." There you have it. That's when Mary forever learned the lesson that she was unlovable, though it took her a long time to accept it. Why, though? She wasn't some kind of monster. Her appearance was quite average. Well, maybe her nose was a bit on the larger side, and calling her attractive would be a stretch. So what? Couldn't she be loved for her soul? Years passed, and Mary's soul remained unwanted by anyone. At 35, she felt like an old woman whose life had long settled down and no changes were forthcoming. Sometimes she wanted to rebel, to do something out of the ordinary, like not make the bed, or howl at the moon. Jostling in the crowded subway car and holding onto the railing, Mary sometimes entertained herself by studying the faces of the passengers and trying to guess how they lived. Was anyone waiting for them at home, or were they as lonely as she was? Here's a serious man in an expensive coat. His pants were pressed with a perfect crease. Obviously a woman's hand. Certainly his wife was waiting for him at home. Here's a girl, glowing and constantly texting someone on her phone. It was clear with her. Ah, there's a very elderly woman, but she didn't look unhappy or lonely either. Mary lowered her gaze slightly and locked eyes with a face. Yes, the true face of a well-groomed cat. It peeked out from the old lady's worn coat collar. Occasionally the old lady would stroke the cat's head and whisper something soothing to it. She too wasn't alone. She had a cat. Why shouldn't I get a cat? Mary suddenly thought. I won't have to return to an empty apartment any more. The cat will wait for me there in the evenings. Yes, it will make a mess, tear up the wallpaper, but at least there will be someone to clean up after and care for. How did I not think of this before? Arriving at her workplace, Mary only solidified this thought and ascended to the third floor into the surgical department, where she worked as a procedural nurse in high spirits. As she administered injections and changed dressings, she joked with the patients, and when she was free, she rushed to sit at the nurse's station and chat with Anna. Anna, like Mary herself, had been working here for many years. The nurses had long become friends. Listen, I've decided to get a cat, Mary announced. You have cats, don't you? And not just one, Anna grimly replied. Recently, my youngest dragged in another kitten from the street. No matter what I do, it messes in the corners and everything. You can't even imagine how many problems these furballs cause. They knocked over my 10-year-old ficus, and not only did they ruin the plant, but they also scattered soil all over the apartment. I was cleaning it up until late at night. The more Anna discouraged Mary from getting a cat, the more Mary became convinced, only smiling in response to her friends' tales of the mischief of cats. Well, since you've decided to take on problems on your own head, then go for a purebred. They say they're smarter, Anna sighed. Smarter and prettier. I want a Bengal. Mary's eyes lit up. She even took out her phone from her robe pocket and began browsing advertisements. The prices for Bengal cats didn't please her. Mary didn't need money, but her entire salary was already allocated. She always set aside part of her salary as savings for a rainy day. It had become a tradition, and Mary didn't want to dip into these savings. You'd be better off finding a side job instead of getting a cat. Anna looked over Mary's shoulder. Look at this ad. A single man needs injections at home. It's extra income and some variety, and the address is not far from your place. You're right, Mary nodded. I'll take on some extra work and buy the best kitten, with a pedigree and papers. She decisively dialed the number listed in the advertisement. The man who answered asked what her profession was and if she knew how to administer injections. Learning that Mary was a nurse, he was pleased and asked when she could come by. In the evening, standing in front of the intercom of an unfamiliar entrance, Mary was excited. Mary's morning routine had suddenly turned into an adventure, something she effortlessly decided on earlier that day. Entering a stranger's apartment felt somewhat daunting, yet judging by his voice, this man was clearly not young, and indeed he wasn't. The man who let Mary into his apartment was well over 60. 65, as James later told her. That was his name. He had joint pain, and his therapist prescribed injections, but he didn't want to go to the clinic every day, standing in long queues with his sore legs. Despite his age, James looked quite presentable. His hair, thick and black as coal, raised Mary's suspicion that it was dyed, a suspicion later confirmed when she saw a tube of hair dye in the bathroom while washing her hands. This didn't bother Mary. She saw it as a man trying to look better as he aged. What really caught her eye was his neatly trimmed salt and pepper beard. which, in combination with his hair, created a striking contrast and made him quite attractive. James himself was very polite and courteous. While Mary administered his injection, the man shared that he had spent his entire life as a scientific researcher. Well, that explains a lot, Mary thought at the time. After giving the injection, she lingered in James's apartment, listening to his stories about himself. Before leaving, the man even kissed her hand. It was a pleasant gesture. Mary returned home much later than usual, and strangely enough, she didn't mind. At least there was some variety. Since then, every evening after work, Mary went not to her own home, but to James's. She administered his injection, and then they would chat for a long time, sometimes even having tea together. Mary felt a pang of regret as the 10 days for which James needed injections passed by so quickly. She genuinely liked the calm, intelligent man. She enjoyed talking to him and spending time together. However, James wasn't ready to let Mary go so easily. On the last day, after settling his bill for the injections, he offered to walk Mary home. She felt slightly embarrassed by the offer, but didn't refuse. James escorted her to the entrance of her building, gallantly kissed her hand, and left. The next day, as Mary exited the metro station on her way home from work, she spotted a familiar head of dark hair in the crowd. James turned his head, clearly searching for her. "Mary," he called out upon seeing her, "I decided to meet you. I know what time you come back from work, so I waited here. You know, these 10 days while you were giving me injections were wonderful. I spent the whole day waiting for you to come, as if I was waking up. And now I feel a little sad that we won't see each other anymore. Shall we take a walk?" Mary herself didn't understand why she agreed so joyfully, but James's words resonated deeply within her heart. Even as she rushed to him in the evenings, she felt alive, needed by someone. Someone was waiting for her. They strolled through the streets, even sat in a cafe. Mary didn't care that they were mistaken for a father and daughter. She felt good. A couple of days later, Mary invited James to her place. There, between them, something happened that usually happens between a man and a woman. It was awkward and clumsy. Later, James apologized, saying he wasn't young anymore, and maybe next time it would be better. Mary latched onto the words, "next time." Did that mean James intended to continue seeing her? Did they have a relationship? The man confirmed her suspicions. "Mary, I'm not young anymore, and I'm very lonely. You know, my wife passed away 17 years ago, and my adult son lives far away. It might sound silly, but I would like to offer you marriage. What happened between us today isn't the main thing. The main thing is our spiritual connection, and with you I feel it. We're good together," James said. "Please, think about it." Mary thought about it. She even consulted Anna at work, which horrified her friend. "Are you out of your mind? Why do you need that old man? You two have a 30-year age gap. You said it yourself. He hasn't achieved much in that department. Well, you know, unless his apartment is nice, he's offering you official marriage." James did offer Mary official marriage, and his apartment was more than nice. Spacious, with 3 rooms. But when Mary agreed to marry the 65-year-old man, she wasn't thinking about the apartment. With this man by her side, her life had become entirely different. Diverse. Her evenings were no longer monotonous. Someone was waiting for her after work. Mary and James didn't have a grand wedding. They simply signed the papers under the bewildered gaze of the registrar. Then they went home and had tea with cake. That was their entire wedding. By that time, Mary had already moved in with James, and he suggested renting out her apartment, renting it out fully furnished. "Mary, don't worry," he assured her. "I have very good acquaintances, a married couple. They're honest, and I'll handle the arrangements myself. I understand that it's inconvenient for you to do this." Mary was glad that someone was taking care of her. Although James suggested they sleep in separate rooms right away, explaining that it would be more convenient for both of them. After the registry, the man decided to seriously improve his health by getting himself the medication that previously seemed too expensive to him. "Mary, you don't mind if I buy it with the money from renting out your apartment, do you? I'm doing this only for you. You deserve a lively husband," James said. Mary didn't mind, and James went ahead and bought himself the medicine, somehow forgetting to buy groceries all the time. Mary ended up having to buy groceries for both of them. She couldn't save part of her salary as before. Moreover, James turned out to be extremely picky about food and asked to buy things that Mary sometimes felt were just a waste of money. Every evening, Mary had to set up IV drips for James, and in the mornings she had to wake up early to measure his blood pressure and sugar levels. "Since I have a nurse for a wife, I must take care of my health," James joked. The next month, after receiving the money from renting out Mary's apartment, James announced, "Mary, you don't mind if I buy myself a new bed, do you? Mine is already falling apart, and with my joints I need to sleep comfortably." Mary didn't mind, although she herself somehow slept in another room on an old sagging sofa. Then her husband needed a new blood pressure monitor. Not just any, but the most expensive one. An orthopedic pillow and mattress followed. In short, James didn't see any of the money from renting out Mary's apartment. Plus, her own salary went towards groceries and utilities. James also became very demanding when it came to health matters. He could call Mary in the middle of her workday to complain about high blood pressure, and she would rush across the city to give him an injection. Gradually, Mary began to feel dissatisfied, especially since she no longer had deep conversations with James. They only discussed his health and comfort. The final straw for her was her conversation with the neighbor in the stairwell. On that day, she was rushing home from work because James asked her to hurry, as he thought his blood sugar level was rising. Mary ran up the stairs, not waiting for the elevator, and saw the neighbor opening the door to the adjacent apartment. She politely greeted her, but the neighbor squinted. "What? Has our James finally found himself a caregiver?" the neighbor asked. "I'm not a caregiver. I'm his wife. James and I got married," Mary replied politely. "Well, that's what I'm saying. Do you think you're the first one? Since James's wife died, he was doing just fine, and he said he would never marry again. But when his health started failing, he became active. He invited many women to marry him, even me, but only if I would take care of him, forgetting about myself. Am I stupid to agree to that?" Then he started looking through ads. He picked younger ones with a medical background. "Do you have a medical background?" Mary blinked in disbelief, unable to believe what the neighbor was saying. She guessed. "And did he not inform you that he was looking for a caregiver? That's a shock. And he used to boast that any woman would marry him, thinking that she would inherit his apartment. But he had long ago signed that apartment over to his son." Before Mary could say anything, James appeared in the doorway. "Mary, don't listen to this gossip," he said. "I've heard all I needed to hear." Mary said, pushing her husband away from the door and walking into the apartment. "Call your tenants, James, and have them move out immediately. Tomorrow I'll return to my apartment." "But that's not how it's done, Mary," James mumbled. "Are you really offended? Is it so hard for you to take care of your husband?" "You're not my husband," Mary cut him off. "You're a patient." Then she added, "And it's not clear why I should have been paying for it. Tonight I'll stay at my friend's, and when my apartment is empty, I'll come back for my things." "Fine! Get lost!" James exclaimed angrily, dropping his pretense. "Who needs you anyway, you ugly thing? You should be glad you got married." A few days later, Mary cleaned her apartment after strangers, putting everything back in place, and sighed. Well, everything was back to normal. She had already filed for divorce, and everything had returned to its usual routine. Although, why back? She could still get a cat. Just no more deceiving herself and delaying the purchase. On the same day, Mary entered an unfamiliar apartment, and several striped kittens ran up to her amusingly. Little Bengals. The seller was a smiling young man about Mary's age. "You know, I live alone," the seller explained, "so it wouldn't be lonely. I got myself a female cat. The cat was lonely, so I had to introduce her to a tomcat." And then the man hesitated, gesturing toward the kittens. "Now I need to find them a new home. I guess I'm asking for too much. Would you like me to lower the price?" "No need," Mary smiled, picking up one of the kittens and hugging it close. "I'm ready to pay, but only if you give me this handsome one. I just don't know how to take care of him yet. And I'll teach you everything if you want," the man said, smiling warmly. Mary looked up at him and smiled back.